Tim, thank you very much for joining us at the Berlin School of Creative Leadership. You've written what I think is an exceptional book on business, markets, and particularly leadership. And I'd like to ask, to begin, for you to introduce the idea of the business romantic.
The idea of the business romantic is, the argument is that it's time for another romantic movement. And by romance, I'm not just talking about romance in relationships or a romantic feeling for a person, but I think romance as a mindset, as a relationship to the world, in particular the world of business. And I believe it's more needed now than ever because we live in this area of another great disenchantment. I think we're being disenchanted by the increasing datafication, the quantification of everything, and the idea of this super optimized, augmented self that is pervading all aspects of our business life, but also our private lives. So I think it's time for the pendulum to swing back. And as I was doing some research on the original Romantic movement 200 years ago, Lord Byron, John Keats, the German poets, Novalis, and so forth, I realized actually that the principles of Romanticism, for me, are the principles of making meaning. And I'm a big believer in business as a powerful vehicle to make meaning. And I realized that they are incredibly relevant in this time where we are facing the second machine age, and that in a way they help us reclaim our humanity in the digital age.
One of the balances that you strike very nicely is between the very high-level analysis you provide, which you've just suggested in terms of a new age of Romanticism, while never losing track of the individual. And even if the individuals, aren't, the extraordinarily talented or gifted poets like you've described from 2 centuries ago, nevertheless, you make clear how they can in fact participate in this new Romanticism. How did you go about thinking through, on the one hand, really individual challenges, maybe individual psychology, and these much more sweeping social and economic changes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the more sweeping social or economic changes are the backdrop, really, but Romanticism was a very individualistic movement that was very much focused on the individual and his or her state of emotional being. And I also wanted to write, while I wanted to describe the pillars of Romanticism, I wanted to write a book that is practical and that is a business book. That was the challenge for me, to write a book about business that is practical and relevant for business people, but that is also in a way enmeshed in the thinking of liberal arts and philosophy. So that was sort of the challenge that I took on in a way. So I was always trying to break it down to concrete rules, even that might be a little bit strange actually to have rules for romantics, because romantics are supposed to be the rebels, the contrarians per se, living without rules really. So the book contains the 10 rules of enchantment, from give more than you take, to find the big and the small, to keep the mystique, to break up, and other romantic principles that I really explore philosophically and then try to break down to a very practical level.
Yeah, I think those rules are at the center of the book, and they're in a way a wonderful playbook for those who want to bring enchantment back to their work lives. In the business context, that challenge between individual and collective or organizational is obviously profound. One of the profiles that you offer is of your friend Alexa Clay, who's also visited us here at the Berlin School. And among her various pursuits is the establishment, which you track, of the League of Intrapreneurs, which is really very much about how individuals who want to effect extraordinary change and transformation can do so within big bureaucracies. Can you say more about how, say, the rules of enchantment can be embraced and activated by individuals within what are oftentimes constraining organizations?
So Romanticism is really a way of viewing the world more than anything else. It's a way of seeing the world of business with fresh eyes, finding meaning in the mundane, experiencing the day-to-day routines of business with a different set of eyes. And I think that applies very much to this, the role of the intrapreneur that Alexa Clay with the League of Intrapreneurs and others have been promoting and fostering, right? The change maker within an organization who is facing some constraints, but at the same time is making incremental change and is a rebel, even if that's at small scale and within a certain box still, but it is a rebel who can propel change forward. And I think it's all about small hacks. It's all about small changes. So I don't think Romanticism is necessarily a company-wide initiative that the CEO can introduce by saying, here's our 5-year plan, here are our 4 strategic pillars, here's our set of KPIs. I think it needs to be a groundswell, it needs to be a bottom-up movement, it needs to be the individual in the organization, people who are intrapreneurs, change makers within their teams, who just run a meeting differently, or handle the hiring and the letting go process differently, who run projects differently, who are very different in their interactions, show more vulnerability, just bring a broader version of themselves to work. So I think it's these small disruptions, the small changes to the day-to-day routine that I think overall can actually transform the typical conventional corporate culture into a more romantic culture that is not only more humane in my eyes, but also ultimately, I believe, in a day that, in a time that's shaped by automation and machines, is ultimately going to be a very, very strong, sustainable, competitive advantage for companies.
I mean, it's exciting, and I have to say, reading through your book, it's very persuasive. I think toward the end, you use the term business romantic company, and the idea that, in fact, as you suggest, a groundswell of individual transformations could in fact change organizations or companies like that. How optimistic are you about that possibility? Maybe you have to be as a business romantic, but could you say a bit more about that? How you see if there's a tipping point, or how, as you say, from small hacks, much grander change can be built.
So it really, to be perfectly honest, it really changes every day. So one day I wake up and I think, oh my God, I'm so nostalgic. I'm so nostalgic. We've lost that battle years ago, to artificial intelligence and the Amazons of the world. And I'm just being nostalgic here with my sentimental attachment to romanticism and to emotions at the workplace and to liberal arts and so forth. At the same time, I'm incredibly encouraged, actually, the more time has passed since the release of the book earlier this year in January, and the more I speak, even at companies like UPS or IBM or Airbus, in front of engineers, and in the heart of companies that are very much engineering driven, but at the same time also very enlightened, I actually am very encouraged, first of all, by this desire for a new concept of doing business. There's a great hunger out there, there's a great desire out there, even though people cannot always name it. And I think I notice a great gratitude for just vocabulary. So just yesterday I was giving a talk in Istanbul. Someone stood up in the audience and said, "Thank you. You've given me a term. I'm a business romantic." I couldn't quite describe my position in business and how I felt about this tension between commerce and meaning and how I would fit in. And now I have the words to actually express what I feel. I'm a business romantic, and that gives me confidence.
That's marvelous. Must be very gratifying for you.
Yeah, and I think that those are obviously small moments and small changes, but I think I certainly feel much more optimistic now than I felt when I set out to write the book, because I felt like, oh my God, I'm sort of an alien. And now I feel like, there is actually, it's in the zeitgeist. I think there's more and more books. Humans Are Underrated by Jeff Colvin. David Brooks recently wrote about romantics and the new computer age. So I think that there's a growing body of work that is actually really making the case for bringing humanity back into business. And not just in the sense of mindfulness, and not just in the sense of serving the bottom line, but really in a more enlightened way of actually business serving humanity and our very human needs at work.
Well, I think your book is a great celebration of humanity and the possibilities, as you say, for bringing it back to the center of our social or collective or organizational lives. Let me ask you a final question, which I think follows from what you've just described, and that is about what might be called the business romantic leader, and how you see leadership figuring into the kinds of changes and really possibilities that you're describing in the book.
So the business romantic leader is obviously super important, and leadership is not just at the top, leadership in all kinds of facets and several layers in the organization. I think the business romantic leader is someone who trusts his or her heart. I was actually very privileged to attend the launch of the Open Manifesto by Danone a few weeks ago in Paris, and Emmanuel Faber, the CEO of Danone, who wrote a really marvelous book, by the way, that is very aligned spiritually with mine, I think is one of these business romantic leaders who is on the one hand, of course, a very business savvy CEO, but at the same time has such a broad view on matters of life, on philosophy, on well-being, on the good life, and how to incorporate that into a style of leading that it's just incredibly refreshing. So I think the business romantic leader trusts his emotions, not only data, and has the courage sometimes to act against data and defy data and rely on the guts and just say, well, I'm making this decision because it feels right. It's the right decision, but it also feels right. Howard Schultz is another example who recently launched a very controversial Race Together campaign where Starbucks encouraged the baristas to basically start a conversation on race with their customers. And Schultz said in an interview later, we didn't do a lot of market research. Yes, we did some, but I actually chose to ignore it because I just knew it was the right thing to do. It felt like the right thing to do. And in this day and age where we so much and so often look to data to provide evidence, that takes guts, literally guts. And it makes you vulnerable, but I think that's really the core of authentic leadership. If you have the courage to make decisions that are not data-driven, by the way, which also means that you are not always consistent. So the freedom to be erratic, the freedom to be inconsistent, to show up to work and to lead a team and change your opinion and be a different version of yourself every day, I find incredibly liberating. And I think that's also a hallmark of a romantic and of a romantic leader. And I think in the long run will be rewarded because there's much more authentic than trying to fit into a formula of consistent inspiration or a consistent persona that you have to live up every day.
All right. Well, Tim, thank you very much for sharing your inspirational ideas with us.
Thank you.